I'm going to sing a song after this sermon and by this thing called coincidence, which happens way too often to be coincidence. The name of the song is Set Me Free. This is not planned. It's just cool how this thing just pops in like that. So set me free. And when Jesus lived upon the earth, he was looking around for disciples, people that could help him with his ministry. These people that he called to him, they were like little puppies. They were so excited. And it reminds me, when I was young, I had a dog, I don't anymore, but this dog, there was one thing you could say, one phrase you could say that it would just send the dog out over the top. Anyone guess what that might be?
Go for a walk.
Get your leash. You say that, the dog would go berserk. There's just nothing. I don't know, maybe some of you have had this experience with your own dog, but when Jesus looked out upon the lake, the sea, and those fishermen out there on the boat, he said, "Follow me." And they dropped their nets. It was like Jesus was saying, "Get your leash." They were totally excited. I mean, I'm going to try to paint a picture for you. This is the chance that every young rabbi, young Jewish boy was waiting for, to study with a real rabbi, to be called to follow him. This is like a dream, like something they dream about. And here it was, a real rabbi had come up to them and said, "Follow me, be my disciples." They dropped their nets. They had finally got asked. They were so excited. This is the first stage of discipleship. I call it show me. Jesus was speaking in parables, and when the parables were done and he was alone with his disciples, they'd come to him and they'd say, "What? This is so mysterious, Jesus. We don't get it. What does all this mean?" And so Jesus then would explain to them what it meant. And then he said this to them. He said, "Listen, my friends, the mystery of the kingdom of God has been given to you. In other words, you are special. You guys are on the inside." They're saying like, "Yes, this is what we wanted." Oh, they're like eating it up, saying, "Jesus, show us something cool. Show us something really, really cool." And the disciples were in it for the spectacle just then at the beginning. They were in it because Jesus was going to show them something wondrous, miracles, casting out demons, all that stuff. And they knew that they were part of something great. They were soaking it in like sponges. "Show me, Jesus." Then something changed. Jesus wasn't doing so many miracles anymore, and he was turning to them and say, "Now it's your turn." And he sent his disciples out 2 by 2 into the cities and towns, and they had a ministry there. They preached the gospel. We're talking about a really successful ministry. Jesus handed over the keys and said, "Okay, now it's your turn. You go drive the car." And they did. And when they got back from the ministry, they were so pumped up. They said, "Jesus, you wouldn't believe what happened." And the Bible tells us that they sat down with Jesus and explained the whole experience to them. And they explained people repenting, people being healed, demons being cast out. I mean, this isn't Jesus doing this anymore. This is his disciples going out and doing this. And they were so excited about this. There's something very, very thrilling about moving from the role of spectacle to being a player on the field. You're part of the team now. And these disciples of Jesus did a great job. In fact, they did such a good job that King Herod even heard the things that they were doing. They were making a very strong impact in the city. The king doesn't hear everything. Now, at this point, the language of the for the disciples actually changes, and the Bible text doesn't call them disciples anymore. It calls them apostles. That's like a promotion.
Yeah.
Of an apostle was a messenger. Apostles, not just students. Apostles go out and do the work of the rabbi. They're not just listeners anymore. They're apostles. And the crowd. They recognized this. And so when the apostles sailed across Galilee, there was a crowd waiting for the apostles. It wasn't just Jesus anymore. It was Jesus and his apostles. At what point did these followers of Jesus become true disciples? Recall, Peter denied he even knew Jesus 3 times when Jesus was being tried for treason. So was Peter a true disciple? I would guess no. What about later, after Jesus' ascension, and James and Peter are entering the temple with the purpose of going and telling everyone there that Jesus was the promised Messiah, knowing full well they were going to get in really big trouble with the Sanhedrin doing this. Well, something happened. A miracle happened. There was a lame man sitting at the gate, asking for money. He couldn't walk. And Peter walked in and saw him, and he said, silver and gold I have none, but what I have, I give unto you in the name of Jesus. Stand up and walk. And he was instantly healed. He stood up and walked. He told everyone about it. And this got Peter and James in way more trouble than if they just gone in and told them that Jesus was the Messiah. At this point, was Peter a true disciple? Yes, he was. Here's another example. 2 mystics are seeking God to be his disciple. How did they do this? The first mystic chose a spiritual path which was very severe in nature. Fasting, seclusion, celibacy. He became a monk, like that's a hermit, and he withdrew from society. He did this to honor a fundamental principle that there is no God but God, and in order to find God, you have to wipe the slate clean of all the things that are not God. Only by reducing the noise in your life to a bare minimum does it become silent enough for you to hear the inner voice, the heart of creation. This is, in fact, a time-honored path to discipleship with God, and it works. The second mystic took a different path. So I'll give you a metaphor. Let's say you are a devotee of the sun, and that's S-U-N, and therefore you denounce all lesser lights, like saying, I'm about the sun. I don't even want to think about any of those other lights. Taking a more liberal stance, we realize that all other lights derive their brilliance from the sun. Likewise, everything is a derivative of God. And so in like ways and in like manner, when we look to all things, we can see God in them. And we can have a relationship with God through all things, including our work, our study, and each other. The sun's light can appear in different places with incredible, unique manifestations. For instance, it can be a fire inside of a crystal. It can be the image of the sun in a mirror shining, and of course that would be the moon. Or it can be the sun shining down on a flower and giving off a brilliant color. The sun's light can appear in different places. And this is the light, this is not the light, but blah, blah, blah. The light's not changing. See, the flower is the same sun shining on, the crystal's the same sun. The light is not changing. It's that the nature of the object in which the light manifests brings out something different from the light of the sun. You don't have to look up to see the sun. Its effects are seen everywhere. Our relationship to God are no different. Examining the first path to discipleship with God. It seems so mystical, so otherworldly. But what if it wasn't? What if we describe our own personal evolution as if it is a journey? And this journey is related to seeing, is to how we see the manifestations of God. What if this journey is one of recognition, seeing God in our ordinary life, unfolding as we pass through this incredible mortal experience? But there's more. Oh, that's the second mystic's path, service. but there's, or seeing God in others, but there's another side to this, and that's service. Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, he said, I'm not going to read the quote. I got it here in case I want to read. But the first principle is a practice of undiscriminating virtue. And by this he meant give loving service to those who are deserving of loving service. And give loving service to those who are not deserving of loving service. And don't make a distinction. When you extend your virtue in all directions without discriminating, your feet are firmly planted on the path that returns to the Tao. There, I read part of this quote. So we're not just talking about seeing God in others as a spiritual path. To be most effective, you must include giving those others loving service as if they are God. If you have done it unto these, the least of my brethren, you have done it unto me, says the Bible. Both paths to discipleship are valid, both loving service and seclusion. And both can be used together. And they have, almost in every case, the silence, the solitude, and loving service are used in tandem to create a path to discipleship with God. God is love, and true discipleship requires us to share that love with all people. Another word for God's love is compassion. True discipleship of God also requires the deepest kind of introspection, looking within in order to gain knowledge of God. Now, what is this knowledge of God? We talked about that last month, would you believe? I will tell you a story about three men who sought to be disciples of God. And I'm going to read part of it. It's out of the Bible. You'll know the story. A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his clothing and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way. Now, this man was a leader of an important Jewish sect. He was important. He was a big shot. He was well respected for his piety and devotion to God. Certainly, he was a disciple of God. But seeing the wounded man, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place, looked upon him. Now, he worked in the temple, performing the rituals that claimed to cleanse his people from their sins. Certainly, he was a disciple of God. But seeing the wounded man, he passed by on the other side. Then a certain Samaritan came along. He saw the wounded man, and he felt compassion for him. He bound up his wounds. He poured in oil and wine. I'm not sure why that helps, but that's what they do. And with drinking the wine, no. But he took him, he put him on his animal, and he carried him to an inn. He helped him that day, and then he left in the morning. And he said to the innkeeper, here's some money. Take care of him. And if you spend more than this, when I return again, I'll give you more money. When at last these three men stood before God, they asked him this question: what shall we do to be thy disciple? God answered, you know the law? They nodded. What does it say? The priest replied, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, I'd like to insert something right here in the middle of this story. We talked about knowledge of God last month, and this is exactly what I mean. Like the cliche says, to know me is to love me. Knowledge of God must include love of God, devotion, and discipleship. To love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and love thy neighbor as thyself. This is the law. Don't forget that last part. It is an essential part of discipleship. Now back to the story. God said to the priest, thou hast answered right. If thou hast done this, thou art my disciple. But the Levite, willing to justify himself, said to God sarcastically, has anyone ever here dared be sarcastic to God? Heaven forbid. But he said, well, who's my neighbor? Trying to get Weasel out of the situation. They all knew the answer, and the priests and Levites soon bowed their heads in shame. But not the Samaritan. The Samaritan, not the priest, not the Levite, but an outcast. He was the only one of the three that was a disciple of God. Some historical explanation is in order. The Jews were in captivity for 70 years, and they were ruled over by the Assyrians, and the emperor of Assyria decided to let the Jews go and gave them the things that was taken from their temple, their gold vessels and things. Said, go back to Jerusalem, rebuild your temple, you're free now. So they did that. Wasn't that a nice blessing? They went back and they began building the temple. Well, when they were taken into captivity, not everyone was killed or taken captive. Some of them escaped, and those lived in the land. They were the Jews that didn't go into captivity. And they said, oh my goodness, you've come back. And look, you have the things that belong in the temple. Let's rebuild the temple. And they wanted to help. Because it's their God, they're Jews. Well, the Bible calls them Samaritans. And the Jews that came from captivity said, oh no, you are not going to help us build the temple. And so a war broke out. Did the temple make them into disciples of God or devoted enemies of each other? Which is more holy, the building or the hearts of men turned completely towards God? When we have suffered a wrong or perceived wrong, our hurt and anger can burrow into our being. We find ourselves living in deep resentment, bitterness that is corrosive to our soul. While we may feel justified, we are only harming ourselves. Releasing bitterness asks us to dig deeper than our pain and anger and shift our awareness to a place of forgiveness and compassion. Beneath the hurt is love, and that love becomes available to us when we are willing to let go of our resentment and pain and dare to love. Not before. And thus he, the Samaritan, was able to put aside his animosity between his people and the Jews and to help a Jew that was in need. That sounds like what Lao Tzu said, doesn't it? So, look for those who cannot stop themselves from giving loving service, and you will have found a true disciple of God. Because with God dwelling in our hearts, loving service becomes our only choice. It becomes the easy choice. Jesus said, come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Underneath our tears runs a river, wild and free, a river of compassion. Be that river and see where it takes you. Now, for meditation today, I'm going to play the flute. So, take yourself into a meditative state with a little deep breathing, and let the music of the flute carry you into your inner world where you can commune with God, or in whatever form that takes for you.